What's going on, everybody? RJ Ochoa here from SB Nation's bloggingtheboys.com. Hope all is well wherever you are. We hope you're happy, safe, healthy, and that you're excited to talk about some 2023 NFL draft prospects, specifically the wide receiver position. That's what we're going to be taking a look at today. As you can see, I'm dressed in my Masters green. I'm putting this video together on Thursday, April 6th. It's almost 2 p.m. Central Standard Time on the dot. Just so you know, we like to say in case anything happens, because some people say, well, why didn't you talk about this in the video? Whatever the case may be. If something happens after 2 p.m. Central Standard Time, I promise you we'll have something up on the channel. So without further ado, let's go ahead and begin to kind of set the stage. I think that when the offseason started, we thought that wide receiver was a much bigger need for the Dallas Cowboys than we currently view it to be. Now, obviously, a big reason for that is the fact that the Cowboys traded for Brandin Cooks. That helps mitigate the overall position as we look at it, from a 30,000-foot perspective entering the NFL draft specifically, and it decreases the need for the Cowboys to really come away with a star playmaking wide receiver, whether it be in the first or second round. Now, that's not to say that we don't want to see that. That's not to say that it still couldn't happen, that it still wouldn't even be wise for it to happen, because the Cowboys could move on from Brandin Cooks, obviously, if they want in 2024. We know that CeeDee Lamb is the alpha of this group and that he's going to be for the foreseeable future. At present time, the Dallas Cowboys have not picked up his fifth-year option for the 2025 season, for the 2024 season, but we obviously know that that is going to happen at some point in all likelihood later on down the road this offseason. Now, the other thing that is a part of this, the Cowboys could get a long-term extension done with CeeDee this offseason, but it is not the top priority given the fact that they have to get the deal done with Trayvon Diggs because he is entering the final year of his contract. He was a second-round draft pick in 2020. CeeDee has that fifth-year option that we talked about. So, again, the overall point here is that the Cowboys are kind of set, and I know it feels that way. It feels like, why would you spend any sort of serious draft capital on a wide receiver this particular offseason if you're set? Well, to that point, I would challenge you and say that it was just 2 years ago, right? If we rewound the clock, rewound the tape, whatever, we went back and looked at some of our videos from the offseason of 2021, we were talking about how the Cowboys had maybe the best wide receiver group in the NFL in Amari Cooper, CeeDee Lamb, and Michael Gallup. And since then, Michael Gallup's gotten a new deal. Obviously, Amari Cooper got traded away. CeeDee Lamb will have his fifth-year option picked up again, as mentioned. I mean, there's a lot of turnover that has happened. And at one point, this was one of the worst receiving groups, right? Like, a lot of time has passed in those 2 years where we have experienced a wide-ranging sort of circumstances when it comes to this position group on this team specifically. The ultimate point is you can never, ever, ever have enough, which is why it would make sense. It would behoove the Cowboys to draft a wide receiver if the right one falls to them, obviously, with the 26th overall pick, presuming they do not trade up. First one on our list that we're going to mention, my favorite wide receiver. If you told me that the Cowboys walked away from the first night of the NFL draft with Jackson Smith-Njigba, I would freak out. I would be on cloud nine. I would be over the moon. There is nothing that could make me happier when it comes to the first round of the 2023 NFL draft. Now, I will say that I don't feel as passionately about that as I did when the offseason began because of the fact that the Cowboys traded for Brandin Cooks, right? That helps, kind of soften the blow if this doesn't come to pass. But there's an argument to be made that Jackson Smith-Njigba is the best receiver in this class. I didn't play last year. Everybody knows that. He is a friend of Blogging the Boys, by the way. We spoke to Jackson in the lead up to the Super Bowl. You can go watch that interview here. He told us, that quote made the rounds, that it would be awesome to end up with the Cowboys. He's a hometown guy. He is a hometown dude when it comes to the Dallas Cowboys. And so to see him in this offense, he is, again, the most polished, arguably, receiver that you can find in this class in an overall perspective. So to have him and CeeDee Lamb be the total, complete future pair for the future, man, I mean, it really does not get much better than that. And so he's kind of an A+ for me. I mean, there's not a lot to say. There's not a lot to add. He does everything really well. Now, the one thing about Jackson Smith-Njigba that kind of might preclude the Cowboys from going down this road is he's really just somebody who does his damage out of the slot. Now, I do think that there was a point in time, I don't know, even 6-7 years ago, where the traditional NFL slot receiver was viewed as not necessarily an important thing, right? It wasn't necessarily something that NFL teams put a lot of resources and a lot of energy into. But you look at CeeDee Lamb. CeeDee Lamb does his best work out of the slot. And so because of that, because of the fact that CeeDee Lamb does operate so much in the slot, Brandin Cooks operates outside, we anticipate CeeDee to get lots of slot usage this coming season. That might cause the Cowboys to not necessarily feel as passionately about this as I do, because if Jackson Smith-Njigba is in your slot, that means CeeDee Lamb is not. And again, I'm not trying to, say that you can't draft him or whatever the case may be, but if you're looking for pros and cons, those are certainly what is associated with JSN. Let's move on to Zay Flowers. There are a lot of people who love Jose, obviously. And once upon a time, I think you can make an argument that the Cowboys would not have been a team that did. And a big reason for that is the size here. I mean, we're talking about one of the smaller receivers that we have connected to the Cowboys in a very, very, very long time, 5'9". I mean, that is incredibly small when you consider what the Cowboys have generally looked for. The Cowboys have always been about these big-bodied, physical, Des Bryant, climb the ladder, red zone threat wide receivers, and we're seeing them. We're seeing them entertain the idea of some smaller wide receivers in this class, some other names that we're going to talk about, and the reason for that is it is a small ball game. It is a game currently in the NFL about winning in space. And so who cares what size you are, right? That's ultimately what the point is here. And I think what the Cowboys have kind of come around on, they do not have to have that dude who is just this physical monster out on the field. And whether or not the Cowboys walk away with a player like Zay Flowers, or again, a few of the names we're going to get to in just a moment, I do think it shows a lot of growth that they are interested in these players, because it shows that they're willing to adapt. They're willing to adjust. I mentioned 6-7 years ago, once upon a time, not very long ago, the Cowboys offense, I don't want to say was predictable, but it was Des Bryant as your X, your big-bodied physical wide receiver, as mentioned, Terrence Williams as your Y, who could kind of handle that other situation on the other side, and Cole Beasley, your sort of prototypical traditional slot wide receiver, obviously operating out of the slot. And it was just kind of chalk in that sense. We all loved, obviously, when the Cowboys did have Amari and Michael Gallup and CD, how they could all work out of the slot to a different degree. So having that unpredictability is a very good thing. There are smaller receivers in the NFL who can win on the outside. They are not always relegated to slot duty. Look at Brandin Cooks. Brandin Cooks is a great example of that and what he has done over the course of his career. So Zay Flowers, an important name to know, to keep in mind. As we move on, though, Josh Downs, even smaller when you get down to a weight perspective. Interesting note coming out on Josh Downs. Like I said, I'm putting this video together on Thursday. He is not taking any premier visits with NFL teams, which is an interesting thing, interesting sort of wrinkle. Doesn't happen all too often. Josh Downs did have a visit with us, along with JSN, in the lead up to the Super Bowl. You can go watch that interview. I would love Josh Downs to wind up as a Dallas Cowboy. I can't really decide who outside of Jackson Smith-Njigba I would love to see the Cowboys draft in the first round, but I have a lot of options in terms of players I would love to see them draft in the second round. Steve Avila, the guard at TCU, is one of them, or Josh Downs. If you told me the Cowboys walked away hypothetically, and again, this is assuming either of those players makes it all the way down to 58, but if you told me the Cowboys' first two picks, for example, were JSN in the first and Steve Avila in the second, or if you told me they were O'Cyrus Torrence in the first and Josh Downs in the second, I would be almost equally thrilled. I really would. I would feel that pleased about it. Josh Downs is an incredible wide receiver, very, very polished, somebody who, again, can come in and help the Cowboys in every single capacity. And that's what we're looking for here. We're looking for dynamic playmakers. We're looking for guys who can help after the catch. We're looking for premier route runners. And Josh Downs kind of checks all those boxes. And again, if he somehow makes it all the way down to 58, assuming the Cowboys are not, they haven't already drafted a wide receiver with the 26th overall pick, it is very hard in my mind to see the Cowboys passing on Josh Downs, but it's also very hard to see him making it all the way down there. That's just the way the draft tends to work sometimes. Let's move on, though, to Jalen Hyatt. This is probably the consensus favorite wide receiver in this year's draft class. I remember when we did the JSN interview and I talked about him then in the comments there and on social media afterwards, there are a lot of people who said, I like JSN, but I want Jalen Hyatt. That was the name. That remains the name for a lot of people. Like I said, putting this video together on Thursday, it was on Tuesday night. So that would be Tuesday, April the 4th. That Jalen Hyatt shared on his Instagram story a photo of the Star. He was at the Star. Obviously, this is the time of year we mentioned where players are doing their visits. We talked about Josh Downs not doing any of them. And so the Cowboys are doing their homework here. The Cowboys are making sure that they have a full understanding over what a lot of people do believe to be is the best overall wide receiver in the class. Again, there's room for interpretation. There's room for multiple opinions here. And Jalen Hyatt is, again, I mean, look, we're talking about the cream of the crop here, right? We're talking about the top guys, players who could go in the first round. That's obviously the goal of this conversation, because it's possible to a certain degree that any of the players, this is the fourth receiver of six that we're going to talk about here, it's possible that one of these dudes hears their name called by the Cowboys on the first night of the NFL draft, or maybe even the second night, again, based on a number of different factors. And so I would personally probably have Jalen Hyatt number 2 as far as overall wide receiver rankings behind JSN, but you can't go wrong here. I mean, that's what's really exciting. You especially cannot go wrong when you consider the offense that any of these receivers would be walking into, not just with the presence of CeeDee Lamb and Brandin Cooks and Michael Gallup, but with Dak Prescott as their quarterback. That is a really exciting thing to consider. Maybe you believe in Hendon Hooker as a project player, as a quarterback the Cowboys could draft or another team could draft, obviously. So you could wind up with both those players. That's always a cool storyline that did happen with, was it Mason Rudolph and James Washington in Pittsburgh once upon a time? That would be a cool thing to see. But Jalen Hyatt, again, for a lot of people, number 1 as far as receivers are concerned, but number 2 for me behind JSN. We move over to Quinton Johnson. This is the more traditional sort of thing. You see 6'3", 208. This is that red zone monster, back shoulder fade, Dez Bryant reminiscent sort of thing. And look, there's logic to this, right? I'm not saying you have to always shy away from the big bodies. You have to always shy away from conventional wisdom. You have to always shy away from what you've done in the past. No, I would love for the Cowboys to go a number of these different directions. And for whatever reason, it feels like as of late, Quinton Johnson's stock has sort of fallen a little bit in the relative draft community. There was once upon a time where it was like, he's going to go into top 10, whatever. If he falls all the way down to 26, these are conversations you have to have, which is why we're having them now. And if you add him to this offense, now they have a viable, true, bona fide red zone target for Dak Prescott to throw it up to so he can go up and get. And that's not a bad thing to have. Who was the last player to do that wasn't Dez Bryant, right? The Cowboys haven't. I mean, you could kind of argue Dalton Schultz maybe. I mean, you generally do kind of get those big body, pass catching tight ends sometimes in NFL offenses, but Quinton Johnson would be an interesting ingredient to kind of add to this overall puzzle. I don't think he's going to make it all the way down to 26, but again, crazy things do tend to happen. And the closer we get to the draft every year, all these things that are starting to kind of wind up being weird with how, again, Johnson's stock seems to be falling just a little bit. Those things tend to happen and bear themselves out in the actual draft. So you never know. Last name we're going to talk about here, Jordan Addison, and super, super interesting option coming out of USC. Obviously, the Cowboys, again, looking at these players under 6 feet is an interesting way to go. Now you're talking about barely under 6 feet here at 5'11", but it does show how the tide is turning. It does show, how conventional wisdom, we've used that term a lot here, but how it has changed for the Cowboys, that they are looking into players who don't have to fit into a certain mold, who don't have to fit certain physical measurements, physical requirements, and that is a breath of fresh air. I'm not saying that means the Cowboys are going to win the Super Bowl. I'm not even saying that means the Cowboys are going to draft the best players in this class. They might have a horrible draft. They might have an amazing draft, whatever the case may be, but they're looking under rocks that in the past they have said, this is silly. Now, Jordan Addison maybe is going to be there at 26. He is a very, very talented wide receiver, obviously, in this class. Coming out of USC, has played some big-time football. All these players really have played football at a very, very high level, obviously. But if this winds up being, where this is probably the least likely situation for me. I say that associating Josh Downs as a second-round draft pick for the Cowboys. I have a difficult time seeing Dallas drafting Jordan Addison in the first round. I think if they're taking a wide receiver at 26, again, assuming they do not trade up, it's because somebody who they are just absolutely in love with fell to them, somebody who they believe is an enormous value, like CeeDee Lamb was in 2020 when he was still on the board at 17 overall. They struck while the iron was hot, and obviously that paid off big time for them. This just feels, I don't know, for whatever reason in my mind, it feels a little bit less likely, a little bit less probable. So that's just kind of what it is. But those are the names to know. If the Cowboys walk away with a receiver or from one of their first 2 picks, it's probably one of those 2 names. I mean, there are a few names that do tend to rise and fall, obviously, as we get closer to the draft. I mentioned today is Thursday. We have 3 weeks to go to the day, today. And so, yeah, these are the names to start familiarizing yourself with. This was the first video that we've done as far as looking at individual names, individual positions. Specifically, we'll, of course, be doing this as we get closer to the draft. We have some mock drafts that are going to be coming out here on the YouTube channel, so make sure you do subscribe so you do not miss any of that. My name is RJ Ochoa. You can follow me on Twitter or Instagram at RJ Ochoa, on TikTok, rj.ochoa. If you'd like to send me an email, you can, rj.ochoa@sbnation.com. Again, later this week, we will have, on Friday, we will have the latest video in our Madden franchise series. We did get Brandin Cooks and Stephon Gilmore on the team. I believe this coming week we are playing the Chicago Bears. It's the last game before our bye. So we've got that going on, and then we'll have a new mock draft coming out. Brandon Laurie is going to be heading those up for us here on the Blog on the Boys YouTube channel. There will also be a mock draft happening next week on the Blog on the Boys roundtable that Brandon Laurie will be a part of. So if you want to watch that live on Tuesday at 7 p.m. Central Standard Time, they'll take your thoughts and opinions there for the mock. For now, I bid you adieu. Have a great weekend, everybody. We'll see you next time.